We are Common Ground, and our team is focused on several things at the same moment. Sea level rise has brought worldwide attention to resilient coastlines, resilient communities, and it's interesting, and this is a good thing, that's why we're all here. But at the same time, in California, here in the Bay Area, seismic activity is probably going to reach a critical moment even before we reach critical threshold with the flooding by water. So what we're trying to do is work trying to reconcile very incremental dynamic with one's very instantaneous. We need to think about frameworks, but we also need to think working from the bottom up within communities. So that's the common ground that we're talking about here. And we have, let me just mention my team members, TLS Landscape Architecture, Exploratorium, Guy Nordenson Associates, Michael Maltzin Architecture, SiteLab, Lotus Water, Rana Creek Design, Dr. John Oliver, and Rich Hindle. And we have really 4 areas of work. The first one we're going to talk about is the geologic foundation of our work. And the second one is the commons of San Pablo Bay. And the third is life on water and the land. And the fourth is voices of San Pablo Bay. So the basic fact here in California is that all of our topography is regulated by earthquake faults. These faults throw up big scarp ridges. So this creates a corrugated topography all the way across the Lake of California, especially San Francisco Bay. The bay's got to move across that, move through it in different ways. And these 2 faults, the Hayward and the San Andreas, really confine the South Bay and the Central Bay. It's a big, soft kind of trough where most of our development is located. And that's going to be an issue for the future. But San Pablo Bay, where the bay begins to take a kind of an eastward turn, is a little different. These ridges really begin to plunge into the water, and there are many different headlands that are right at the edge of the water. It's no longer just soft ground. So we think this is a very interesting place to investigate and develop as an idea overall. Infrastructure around San Pablo Bay currently is very brittle. As you can see all these pictures, it's either flooding or it's about to break. And that's a problem because it's not going to last over time. We think instead, what if we allow the land and the water to do a bit more of what they really like to do? What if we turn this encircling infrastructure to something perpendicular that allowed the water to flow in and the headlands to be used as part of our overall regional structure? So here, this is the idea of letting the land and the water interact, become a framework for living, not necessarily all of it for development. San Pablo Bay is one part of the bay that really is missing an identity, but we think it could have one. It's a working estuary. It's a very healthy estuary. It's full of not only all kinds of mixing. This estuary is tidal waters and brackish fresh water mixing constantly. It's very fertile and fresh. It's got 80% of the bay's marshes. It's got extremely rich wildlife resources that live within this matrix. So we would propose this. This is the commons. This is the place where these cities, all the way around, simply have a front door that they can face on the bay, and they can communicate with each other. They can be unified in certain ways with each other. And we can take the advantage of these headlands to actually access by water, opening up the mobility of places that are currently hard to get around. And these locations that we're talking about, these nodes, I'm trying to go back, yeah, are not all, we're not identifying these as huge ferry terminals and development sites. We're talking about a network of education and linkage between people. And so that would involve, first of all, a network of actual field stations and outposts for understanding and research that Susan will explain a bit more about.
Sorry, which is the button? This one? Yeah. So a field station is really a research station in the field, in the landscape in which is being studied. We've been exploring this a lot. Scientists do this all the time, but we've been exploring it as an educational opportunity. At the Exploratorium, we do a lot of work in outside landscapes, and the idea of situating people much better to understand the actual conditions they live in is the idea of having these learning hubs throughout this Bay Area, San Pablo Bay community. At Sears Point, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the situations there. It's situated on a headland with the southernmost point of the Rogers Creek Fault. It plunges under the bay and connects to the Hayward Fault. The earliest history of Sears Point is really not hard to see when you look at the landscape. It's mostly wetland on these headlands. Upland is a lot of farms that have been in use for centuries. Down near the bottom, near the bay, it's a slough and very open area that in the past farmers would send their goods down the sloughs. They would go out San Pablo Bay and all the way to San Francisco and really all the way to the world. The goods and things that were grown up there, we always think of it as wineries, but in fact, in the past there were potatoes, grains, pumpkins, hay, all kinds of things that were traveling down these sloughs and going off to market. Eventually, of course, these sloughs were filled in a bit with more agricultural areas. It's easier to farm on flat land than on hills, so of course in the late 19th century it was important to develop these areas for them. You can see in this old map that these sloughs were really quite open. And up in that very tiny center one was a little area called Fairville, and it had a small landing, and many of these sloughs had landings, and many of the farmers and the people who were getting and receiving goods using the waterways with sort of small draft boats that could work with the tides. Today, of course, it's quite different. Highway 37 is built on a levee. It has made it so that many of these sloughs are closed or culvertized. As you can see, sea level rise is already affecting Highway 37. King tides, storm surges, all these things are making it inoperable at times. Although there is a plan in 2088 to rebuild this particular landscape, rebuild the highway. It's going to take another, several 20, 30 years to 2100 to finally finish it. And unfortunately, it's very expensive, and it probably won't really work. It's a lot of public money, $1.5 billion or more to invest in this, and perhaps there's other ways to use that money. We took a transect through Sears Point, really looking at some of the possibilities, and we used this as a research tool to understand what some of the options are. And I think the thing we really want to do, it's very simple. We just want to connect those uplands to the south, to the baylands by opening up the waterways, perhaps using them for transportation systems. We also think it's a great opportunity. There's so much restoration going on with the Sonoma Land Trust. Recently, the Bay Trail created a wonderful section down there. So there's more access for people, but we want to improve that even more. And perhaps, maybe we shouldn't really redo Highway 37. Maybe we should get rid of it. Maybe it should be elevated so that the landscape works underneath it. Perhaps we can restore those waterways and think of light travel through those lands that won't affect the restoration that's going on, because the boats don't really have the kind of heavy wave action that a ferry has. And also in this landscape, we really want to make it better for people, to connect them so that they understand. These processes are going to take years and years and years. So to create these small field stations that would be using vernacular architecture, pumping stations, old barns, whatever it might be, outfitting them with perhaps some exhibits, some information. They could also be used as community gathering points. And there would be a hub. There would be some in the wetlands, there would be some in the uplands, and there would be all around our Bay Commons as we're thinking about it. So our idea here is really not a lot of development. It's really just opening up this landscape to do what it used to do, to open up the waterways and to really think not only to use it to move in and out, but to use it to move across the bay. Wouldn't it be nice if people from Richmond could easily get on a small ferry and come to Sears Point, and likewise in other directions? So I think our idea is really to make this bay a commons that everyone can share.
Okay, and as Susan mentioned, life on the water and land is really important to us. And water transit is, in our mind, key to resiliency. Historically, as Susan mentioned, early settlement used natural sloughs as a way to navigate across the bay. This is going to be difficult. Coordination. And then industrialization had reclaimed along that waters through railroads. And then, but even through industrialization, actually, there was still ferries in service, water transit in service. It was only until the bridges were constructed that the ferries went away. Today, we're looking at extended auto commutes, water redevelopment along the water. And so the question for us is, if we're going to grow the bay, can we increase and grow water transit to parallel that? So Vallejo is an interesting site for that. It's, to quote its model, the city of opportunity. It's, in fact, provides a lot of opportunity for housing affordability in the region. It's where myself, my family, and many others can actually buy a house in the Bay Area and live and work in here. That's tremendously important. And it also it's one of the most diverse cities in the nation, which is very important. But that diversity has yet to take advantage of the economic opportunities that have surrounded the rest of the Bay Area, despite being only 30 miles to San Francisco. It has an underutilized waterfront, even though it's a waterfront city. Historically, the Navy shipyard provided the economic opportunity for Vallejo for a long time, and its closure and subsequent bankruptcy of the city has not allowed Vallejo to kind of take advantage of the economic opportunities the rest of San Francisco has. It's actually a strategic location for a resilient city. It does not flood. It relies on the marshlands to the north, the Napa River, to provide a natural resiliency for flooding. It also has headlands on Mare Island and the Vallejo to provide that resiliency for seismic events. And it has an amazing marshlands that faces San Pablo Bay that is actually in growing sediment. Okay, so we think Vallejo is a fantastic opportunity to provide a strategic location for investment in resiliency planning and infrastructure that can provide a catalyst for redevelopment of the city. So this idea that resilience planning and investment in resilient infrastructure here in the way of ferry transportation can provide the key catalyst for growth of a city. In fact, the idea of using a fleet of boats that are not one size fits all, but the idea that we can invent patents and particularly invent boat infrastructure that fits the natural conditions of sediment deposition so we're not relying on heavy dredging. Scenario planning for WETA, which was created basically after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, provides that scenario for emergency transportation when bay traffic is gone. And we think that, and there's actually planning that evacuates the entire San Francisco to city of Vallejo during emergency events. And the idea that this catalyst of resilience and scenario planning for emergency events can actually begin to grow a new identity and economic opportunities for a city like Vallejo. Here's a sketch that Michael Maltzan had done that shows the idea of a new invested gateway and a hub for resiliency planning.
Yeah, the other thing that WET is interested in doing that is intriguing is they're looking for ways to promote ferries. They're got to have a bond issue coming, and they would really like to attach more a variety of lifestyles, diverse uses and things, different themes, so that ferries become a kind of a node in the city. It's really a place to collect and organize people, organize your life around the water. We think it's a fantastic thing to get behind. Voices. Who are the people that have been living here? Who are the people that live here now, and how do they live? What is their social fabric? What have they left, and what are they hoping for in the future? How do their lives work? That's what we've got to understand in order to really motivate the process. In North Richmond, we spent time working there, so we know people. We've met them on the ground. We know Whitney Dotson, who did Parkchester marsh restoration. We know Doria Robertson, who's doing urban farming. And we know Tootie Marr. And all these people have control, not control, they are the kind of the organizers, the advocates for this process. So what we'd like to do is help people that are stuck behind levees, behind railroads, isolated by infrastructure, and start a new process of realizing a park that really begins, let me give you the pan of the whole city here. It begins the uplands and the hills down to this very industrial waterfront. So many areas are going to be flooded, will also be liquefied. We want to find ways to overcome the super challenge of the infrastructure. This site is more challenged than any other one because of what's there, the refinery, the highways. And it's soft ground, and how are we going to help people live their lives in a way that's diverse and ambitious for the future? So our idea is to begin North Shore State Park and begin right there at Whitney's marsh restoration and work all the way to Point Richmond, all the way across the North Shore. And it's going to be a long undertaking. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of negotiations. But we need to start, and we need to implement a number of different kinds of projects here between farming, access, affordable housing that can get across infrastructure, beginning to work with the water, adapt to the water, so that this vision someday could be realized. And what this is about, this final vision to North Shore State Park, is this is the promise. This is where we could go with the fact of sea level rising. So it's not all bad necessarily. This is an opportunity to reclaim and regain the thing that we had from 150 years ago, renewed again, but in connection with people's lives and access along the shore, connection back and forth from water to land to the hills instead of cutting off at the edges. And that's a big rock on San Pablo Bay. Thank you.